your question. And lastly, please direct your question to either Chuck or Brent. So with that, we'll start taking questions. Sam Carchidi, you're on with Chuck and Brent. Go ahead.
Yeah, this is for Chuck. Chuck, first of all, how difficult was it, or is it, to put together this expansion protected list? And the second part, what did you learn from the Vegas draft when you were with Minnesota, and how will it have any effect at all on how you approach this draft with Seattle?
Well, Sam, first of all, I think we have our expansion draft list put together. If we make moves between now and then, we can adjust it, obviously, but we have a pretty good idea of what we want to do and who we're going to protect and who we'll make available. So, we had, for this expansion draft, we had more time than we did versus the Vegas draft, and, more time to make sure we had all the holes filled and we met all the criteria that we needed to meet. So, from that standpoint, it's been a little simpler. The pandemic and the flat cap has made it probably more difficult because the cap, obviously there's cap pressures on teams. So Seattle will certainly have an opportunity there to talk to teams about helping them out with their cap issues in exchange for various assets. So we'll see how that plays out. And Seattle, I'm sure, will have good options. They've worked hard, but I think we had a little bit more time to plan for this one, and we feel like we're in good shape.
Sam, did you have a follow-up?
Yeah. Is there anything though that you learned from the first draft, from the draft with Vegas, like maybe that would affect you and your decisions this time?
Not necessarily. Every situation's different. Our team in Minnesota was a lot different than the team here in terms of the makeup and the composition of the players. So, I think your goal is always to do the best thing for the organization. And in our case here now, I think our decisions, we had pretty good unanimity of what we wanted to do when we had our pro scouts in town. And so I think it's a process that maybe a little bit more experienced, but we had more time to prepare. So again, I think our list is pretty straightforward.
Charlie O'Connor, you're on with Chuck and Brent. Go ahead.
Hey guys, this is for Chuck. Again, about the expansion draft. You mentioned about the protection and about potentially with asset trades and whatnot. Do you think it's likely that you might look to work out a side deal with them to steer them in a specific direction? Or are you more leaning towards just submitting your list and letting them pick and choose with who you leave available?
I'm open to either. I've had several conversations with Ron going back a few months now, and it's. We'll probably take guidance from them if there's something that they think would make sense for them and would make sense for us. But my expectation is we'll submit the list, and if whether there'll be conversations after we submit the list or not, time will tell. But we're certainly comfortable just submitting the list and having them select a player. And I've just indicated to them if they have ideas on something else they want to accomplish to let us know.
Steve Wino, you're on with Chuck and Brent. Go ahead.
Hey, Chuck. I'm just curious, what is the chatter for you and for other GMs right now? And Ken Holland said, unless you're talking to Ron Francis, there's not a lot going on kind of right now. He's anticipating waiting until the expansion draft for stuff to happen. Is that a fair read on what's going on right now?
It's probably every team's different. I've certainly, the phones have been busy. I've been receiving calls. I've been making calls. So we're all speaking with each other. It's every team's in a little bit different spot. For some teams, they can acquire a player now and it doesn't impact their list that much. There's other teams that would much rather wait till after the expansion draft to make a trade to upgrade their club. So, I think everybody's different. It seems like more teams would prefer to wait until after Seattle makes their decisions. But there is a lot of dialogue, and teams are I think trying to get a read of the room right now, see who's available, what other teams are trying to do, and what options we all may have once we get closer to the draft and free agency. So a lot of chatter, but yeah, from our standpoint, we certainly aren't going to be making a trade today or tomorrow unless something unexpected breaks right now.
Jordan Hall, you're on with Chuck and Brent. Go ahead.
Hi, Chuck. Hi, Brent.
Hey,
This is
Jordan.
for Chuck. Chuck, I was wondering, have you informed the players that you plan on exposing in the expansion draft? And if so, is there an awkwardness to that conversation, or is it just as business as possible?
I haven't officially informed them. I've had conversations with a few of them, several conversations with a couple of them about the likelihood of it and about what we're trying to do and why. Again, as we get closer to Saturday, whether it's Friday or Saturday, I will reach out to some of the players for sure to give them a courtesy heads up. But things could still change, so I don't want to jump the gun too much. But I think a few of them are aware of what our position is, and we've had good conversations.
Bill Meltzer, you're on with Chuck and Brent. Go ahead.
Hi, guys. I actually have a question for both of you. I'll start with Chuck. Chuck, how are you looking at these next few weeks in terms of being crunch time for being proactive for major moves you may make in the offseason versus taking a long view of having the entire offseason until when rosters have to be filed to, make changes to the team?
This summer to me is similar to every summer, every offseason. The goal is to try to be as competitive as we can next year, and yet we want to make sure we keep a large quantity of future assets that we can continue to, that can continue to help us get better as we move forward. So we're looking at everything. It's an exciting time in a sense that with the Seattle expansion draft, with the flat cap, you might see maybe a few more trades, a few more hockey trades throughout the league. The draft is always an exciting time. We're picking higher than where we want to pick, but yet, we're having the 13th selection will give us an opportunity to get a pretty good player. So there's going to be some, I think, hopefully some exciting additions to our club over the next couple months, and probably a few moves around the league that you normally wouldn't see because of expansion and because of the flat cap. So, we're going to continue to try to make moves that make us better. And we know we have a lot of work ahead of us, and we'll do the best we can.
Bill, did you have a follow-up?
I do. This question is for Brent. Brent, when you look at the draft this year, I think one of the things that makes it interesting is you have two very highly rated goaltenders that potentially could fall into that top 10 to top 15 range. Do you see that playing in potentially to where who you might pick as your best available player, whether it's one of the goalies or somebody who might slide you as a result?
Yeah, possibly. It's gonna be a really interesting draft. I think like it's probably been written about. I think the top 8 or 9 guys, I think teams will have them in different orders, but it's probably going to be the same names. And what you're going to see is it goes all over the board. I think there's a number of players that probably media outlets and whatnot have not seen a lot of, but teams have done their homework on certain players. Some players haven't played at all this year, which is unique for us and for everybody. So you're going to see some variance as the draft expands. So it'll be interesting to see. We're going to be working up right through next week to finalize everything and tighten everything up. But it'll be interesting to see how it plays out.
Sam Carchidi, you're on with Chuck and Brent. Go ahead.
Yeah, this is for Chuck. Chuck, you have some players who have big contracts. Does that make it easier for you not to protect them in the expansion draft?
Well, I think right now with the flat cap, it's difficult to move players with high salaries in general. But I don't know if it makes it easier for the list or not. I mean, ultimately, Seattle's coming in with with zero cap dollars. So certainly they have the ability to add good players regardless of contract if they choose. So I think you're always trying to, make decisions where you're protecting the players you feel you need to protect for the short and long-term good of your franchise. But I think generally speaking in this environment, it goes without saying it's difficult to move money right now, and cheaper contracts are probably more valuable in that sense.
Follow up, Sam?
Yeah, I'm not sure if this is for Chuck or Brent, whoever feels comfortable answering. As far as the draft, is your number one draft pick in play for a trade, or do you want to keep it?
Sure.
Depends who you ask.
Yeah. Brent wants me to keep it. No, I look, it's a really good asset. If we use our first round pick to select a player, we're obviously going to be able to draft a high quality player that'll help us. But yet, because it's of high asset value, I think we have to explore what we can do with it. So, the likelihood is you normally end up keeping your first round picks, but I think this offseason in particular, I think I'm more willing to look at moving it, and there's some way we can help our team, not just in the short term, but more over several years, over the longer term. And it cost me the first round pick. If I can get that type of asset, I'll certainly look at doing it.
Charlie O'Connor, you're on with Chuck and Brent. Go ahead.
Hey, this is for Chuck, and it's more of an overarching question about the offseason. Going back to March when we talked to you with regards to the blue line core, you talked about how you thought the makeup of the group as a whole probably wasn't right. You needed to address that going forward. Does that still remain a top priority for you this summer now that you've had the opportunity to, talk with the coaches, talk with the staff as a whole in terms of your offseason meetings?
Well, I think there's been a lot of focus on the blue line. I mean, to me, the number one priority is our goals against. It was just ridiculous how many goals we gave up last year. That goes back to everything. It goes back to the coaches having a great training camp and using the practice time early in the season to reinforce our systems and our structure. It's our goaltenders playing better. It's our defensemen playing better. It's our forwards managing the puck better. We need we're going to need to look at upgrades to our roster. There's no question. And we're also going to need the players that are returning to play better, in particular without the puck, and structurally, we're going to need our coaches to get our players back and, again, back in that structure and reinforce the system. So, it's not just one thing that led us to fall from 7th in the league defensively to the bottom of the pile. And, you have no chance to win in this league unless you're at least in the top half of the league defensively. So we have a lot of work to do. Again, we have holes we need to fill, and we have players that are currently on our roster that need to play much better. And it's got to be a holistic approach. It's not just one player that's going to turn it around. It's everybody, starting with me, that has to be much better this year. And that has been conveyed to everybody in the organization.
Ed Barkowitz, you're on with Chuck and Brent. Go ahead.
Hey, Chuck, you mentioned it very briefly about the pandemic. Does that factor into your decision? You had a lot of younger players who didn't play as well this season. Does that factor into your evaluation, the pandemic and all the challenges that brought this year?
It's a bit. I mean, it's hard to say for sure what caused some of our young players not to play at the same level. I mean, the pandemic would be one logical reason. Maybe expectations for some of them coming off a strong year and just assuming, you'd be able to come back and do the same thing. I do think it certainly is a reason to give pause. I think some of our young players, at least in my opinion, are better than how they performed last year. And I think you need to be a little bit careful overreacting to 1 year, particularly 1 year as crazy as last year was. Yet we know they have to be better, and we have to be better. So I don't know that I think we just want to be a little bit careful here. We've worked hard as an organization for the last 7-8 years to patiently add and draft and develop a lot of young players. And it's kind of been the focus of the franchise, going back to 2014, probably. You got to be a little bit careful that you don't change course and start moving by good young players that maybe struggled for a little bit last year. We have to find a way to make them better. We have to get better, and we'll work very hard at that. And, we've spent, we'll probably get into this later on in the summer, but spend an awful lot of time this summer looking at our staff, our structure. And I think we've made some really meaningful changes and improvements to how we do things, not just from a coaching standpoint, but from a development standpoint, a scouting standpoint, a data standpoint. And I think, we put a lot of time and effort this summer into fixing some things off the ice that we think will lead to better on ice results. So again, we've looked at everything. Last year was unacceptable. It's been a busy off season behind the scenes, and I'm really happy with some of the moves we've made. And now we have to find a way to get better on the ice, and that'll be the focus from here on out.
Jordan Hall, you're on with Chuck and Brent. Go ahead.
Hi, guys. This is for Chuck. Chuck, just wondering, have you zeroed in on candidates for your assistant position on the big club staff and the 2 assistants down in Lehigh Valley?
Yeah, we've made a lot of personnel moves that we'll announce in short order. But we've spent 2 months doing this stuff, so we'll have a lot of changes to announce here in the near future. But we've worked pretty hard at that. I think we're in a pretty good position going forward.
Adam Kimmelman, you're on with Chuck and Brent. Go ahead.
Yeah. Hi, this is for Chuck. Chuck, I want to go back to what you said about the number 13 pick possibly being in play. Is there a certain type of elite player, a certain position that you're focused on? If a player of one position comes up, maybe a defenseman, that you consider moving it for, or are other areas of need that you would consider, moving that pick for it, and it has to be in a certain elite type of player?
Well, I think the second part of it would be the more important part. If you're going to move the 13th overall pick, either by itself or as part of a package, you better be getting a really good player that can help you for a few years. I'm not sure that it has to be position specific, but certainly you want to make sure you're getting a good player that can help you in the short and long term.
Gary Santaniello, you're on with Chuck and Brent. Go ahead.
Thank you, Joe. Good morning, Chuck. Good morning, Brent. This question is for both of you. As we've seen from Cale Makar and Cole Caulfield, a second year of college really helped them. And, you signed Cam York after his second year. With regards to Cam, what difference did you notice in his second year of play? And generally, what benefit do you see from a college player staying for a second year?
I can handle it. Well, first of all, for every player is different, especially in coming up after you draft them, both physical maturity, mental maturity. Obviously, staying in college for an extra year is beneficial in a lot of cases. Some players are ready after their freshman year, but playing another year of college never hurts. And I think in Cam's case, in particular, it allowed him to grow physically. He got invaluable experience coming in, playing some games in the American League, getting his feet wet in the NHL at the end of the year, to see where he needs to get to physically, to see how playing in the NHL every day works. So Cam is obviously a very intelligent player. His skill set is very good. But knowing now for him what he needs to do this offseason to get ready for this year it should be, has really helped him and has prepared him for his offseason here.
Sam Carchidi, you're on with Chuck and Brent. Go ahead.
Yeah, this is for Brent. Brent, how would you characterize this draft overall as far as strengths and weaknesses? That's the first part. And in the past, I know you've always gone for the best player in the draft in the first round. Is that still the strategy this year?
Well, first of all, this draft, I think it's been well publicized. I don't think there's any generational players in it. However, there are some quality players at the top end, and there is some depth throughout the draft. There's there's some different tiers like every year, and our group has done a pretty good job identifying those. But I do think there's some depth through the second, third round this year that our guys are excited about, and even beyond. So we'll continue to work through that this and next week, and be ready for next Friday. And then as far as the strengths of the draft, I think there's some quality defensemen at the top of the draft. There's some quality centermen. There's wingers. There's, it's publicized. There's a couple goalies that'll likely get into the first round here. So should be an interesting week to see how it plays out.
Charlie O'Connor, you're on with Chuck and Brent. Go ahead.
Yeah, this is for Brent, and this is kind of a follow-up to a question you were asked earlier. Bill mentioned about the goalie prospect. You just mentioned about them in the first round. They might be available at 13 if you guys keep the pick. But, obviously you have Carter as a young starting goalie at the NHL level, even though he didn't have a great year. Would the presence of Carter in the organization make it less likely you take a goalie at that spot, or does that not really matter and play into the decision?
No, I think we have Carter, obviously, is a young goaltender. We have a couple goalies outside the NHL that we feel have a chance as good prospects. But no, if it's the best, it's the next best player on our board, we'll certainly consider it and take him. But at the same time, we have a number of different players and positions that we'll look at as well. So, but no, we're not opposed. If it's clearly the next best player on our draft board, we'll take that. And to Sam's question earlier, as far as position, we don't really draft by position, especially in the first round. We go by our list, the best player available. And realistically, as you've seen in the NHL, a lot of these players don't play next year. So sometimes their needs right now are changed by 2 years down the road. So that's just the reality we're in.
Joe Fordyce, you're on with Chuck and Brent. Go ahead.
Hi, this question is for Chuck. When you were talking about how the kind of the calm nature of the beginning of the offseason earlier, and then you see a move yesterday like Chicago makes to trade Duncan Keith. Is there kind of a trickle down effect, like almost innate pressure to, okay, this got the ball rolling, so let's, this really got the ball rolling in the offseason. We need to get moving here. Is that kind of a natural reaction to the first big move of the offseason?
I think that move was probably a little bit different. That was I think the player had reasons for wanting to go, and there was certain teams he would go to, and two teams were able to make a trade. But I don't know if it's as much that. I think it's just the timing of everything between the expansion draft and the entry draft following that a few days later, and then the start of free agency. We have all the big events, that may involve player movement really happening within literally a 10 or 12 day period. So, once you get past the first day of free agency, the amount of players that are available and the amount of cap space that's available will probably be much more limited. So I think, there's, I guess, pressure in the sense that if you have moves you want to make, this is when you got to try to make them. And having said all that, it's somebody asked this question or brought this point up earlier. In this type of environment where there's not a lot of liquidity in the system, it's a flat cap system. It's moves are a little trickier, in part because of the expansion draft, but there's not a lot of teams that are just able to take on a lot of money. So there's a lot more, there's a lot of communication about dollar for dollar type of moves, or can you take some money back, or can you do this? So it makes it a little bit more complicated. But in saying that, over the next 2 weeks, my guess is the majority of player movement that happens this summer will take place.
Okay, we have time for a few more questions. Charlie O'Connor, you're on with Chuck and Brent. Go ahead.
Yeah, this is for Chuck, and again, a little bit more bigger picture. You talked about the importance of the younger players having a much better season than they did last year for the most part. One thing you talked about in your postseason press conference was the importance of workouts, training in the off season, the struggles that some guys had with the challenge of the pandemic last off season. I guess, what are you guys doing to ensure working with those guys to make sure that doesn't happen again? And are guys going to be maybe coming back to Philly earlier to make sure that that they don't run into those same issues again?
Well, in terms of the first part of the question, Charlie, we have our strength coaches, worked with the players before they left in terms of the summer program they'll follow. Most of our players have trainers that they train with during the off season. It seems to be a fact of life now for most pro athletes. And this summer, obviously, gyms are open and trainers are able to train the players in person, where last off season was maybe a little bit more problematic in some locations. So, but the players have a good idea of what's expected of them. Our strength coaches stay in touch with them. Our team nutritionist has reached out to them. And so we stay in contact with them regularly through the summer. And as the summer moves on, our coaches will follow up with them. So there's a lot of follow up, and these guys are professionals. They know what they need to do. They will work hard. And again, I think it'll be easier for every athlete, not just our players, to have access to ice rinks and gyms and everything that maybe in the previous off season was more limited. So, there's a pretty good plan in place for that. In terms of guys coming back early, that's really up to them. I know some of the players, Shane Gostisbehere is obviously here. Provorov has been here for a while, and then he just went back home. We'll have some players that'll come in and as the summer moves on and train here, but that's really up to them. And my expectation is by Labor Day we'll have a lot of people here, and in terms of our veteran players. But typically it's pretty quiet around here in July for the veteran players.
We'll do two more questions. Sam Carchidi, you're on with Chuck and Brent. Go ahead.
Yeah, this is for Chuck. Is there any progress being made in negotiations with your RFAs, specifically Carter Hart, Nolan Patrick, and Travis Sanheim? And then the second part, do you have interest in re-signing, or have you talked with the UFAs, Sam Moran, Brian Elliott, and Alex Line?
I don't know that I really want to get into updates on signings. Usually try to keep that stuff pretty quiet. I will say with the RFAs, it hasn't been a front burner issue. There's plenty of time to get to those. We have to make the qualifying offers by the Monday after the draft, and we'll make those sometime between now and then. And then typically the ball gets rolling from there. I mean, I've had some preliminary talks with a few of the guys you've mentioned, but at this point, again, we have time, and we'll get to those in due course.
Last question, Steve Wino, you're on with Chuck and Brent. Go ahead.
Hey, Chuck, I apologize for the wacky question. I don't know if you saw the damage the Stanley Cup took yesterday. I don't know if when you had your celebration with the Penguins in 09 or with your dad in 89, do you ever remember worrying about that or damaging it in any way?
Well, in 89, I know the tradition of everybody getting the cup for a day I don't think was enforced back in 89, but I remember we did have the cup, and my dad brought it to a couple local hospitals, and we had a friend that was in a hospital at the time. So I remember bringing the cup there, but certainly there weren't a lot of shenanigans with the cup back then. I've heard various stories over the year, but I don't have any recollections of doing that. But certainly, it looked like they had a lot of fun yesterday.
Okay, Chuck, Brent, thank you very much for your time this morning.
All right. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
All right, everyone, that concludes the Flyers media availability. Be on the lookout later this afternoon for recordings and audio and transcript coming your way. Thanks, everyone. Have a good day.